Right, so yesterday marked the first anniversary of the Israeli airstrike on an aid convoy in Gaza being conducted by the charity World Central Kitchen, which resulted in the deaths of 7 aid workers, 3 of whom were British. This should have been a turning point in UK cover for Israel. The then Tory government did no such thing. Israel have made no formal apology or even bothered to make contact with the British families of those affected. And yet at one point there was much talk of the surveillance footage the RAF had gathered of the incident during the course of one of their numerous spy flights for Israel being used to form part of the formal investigation. Well, as it turns out, Keir Starmer might have blocked that. The UK government are now refusing to release footage of what happened to the family of one of those Britons who died in that strike, James Kirby, as his family demand an independent investigation, whilst the government seems perfectly content to just let Israel do an investigation into an event they were responsible for. The only pressure being applied by the UK is that Israel hurry up and complete it. So why won't Starmer's regime release the footage? What are they hiding? And is it more the case that the RAF have conducted so many flights for Israel now that the footage makes the UK complicit in Israeli war crimes to the point any footage at all from the genocide of Gaza taken by the RAF must never see the light of day? Right, so on the 1st of April 2024, an Israeli airstrike targeted a World Central Kitchen WCK aid convoy in Gaza, killing 7 humanitarian workers, 3 of whom were British citizens, James Kirby, James Henderson and John Chapman. The attack, which occurred despite the convoy's coordinates being shared with Israeli forces in advance, was a shocking violation of international humanitarian law, a war crime on the part of Israel, an incident that should have been a turning point for the British government in their support for Israel, when our own people were now being killed by them. Yet nothing of the sort really happened. Yet more than a year later, the families of the victims are still being denied justice, and the UK government, under Keir Starmer's leadership now, refuses to release crucial RAF surveillance footage capturing the event that could hold Israel accountable. This refusal is just inexcusable. It is not an administrative delay, it is not a national security issue or any other excuse that the government is coming out with. The RAF covered events in a foreign land on behalf of another state, so it really has nothing to do with our national security. It is therefore a deliberate obstruction of justice for their national security. The UK has been conducting intelligence gathering flights over Gaza from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, providing Israel with real-time surveillance data. These flights make Britain complicit in Israel's military operations, including potential war crimes. By withholding evidence that could implicate Israel in the WCK killings, therefore, the Starmer government is prioritising its relationship with Israel over justice for British citizens, for the families of those affected, shielding both Israel and in all likelihood itself from accountability and charges of complicity in said war crimes, very much implying that Starmer knows these are war crimes, knows Israel are committing genocide despite refusing to say as much. The WCK convoy was delivering desperately needed food aid in Gaza, where famine-like conditions had taken hold then, just as they have again now, due to Israel's blockade and military campaign. The 3 British victims, James Kirby, John Chapman, James Henderson, were security contractors working to protect humanitarian efforts. Kirby was a former Royal Marine from Bristol. He dedicated his life to helping others in conflict zones. His family described him as a man who wouldn't hesitate to help those in need. Despite coordinating their movements with the IDF, the convoy was struck in a drone attack. The vehicles were clearly marked with the WCK logo, and their route had already been approved. The IDF later admitted the strike was a grave mistake, blaming misidentification, but they knew exactly who they were. It's an explanation that strains all credibility given the level of surveillance in Gaza, on top of what the IDF had already been told. The fact all of these trucks in the convoy were literally covered in WCK livery, that there were 3 separate strikes on this convoy on 3 separate vehicles. That same surveillance is what Starmer's regime is apparently determined to keep covered up, though. Declassified UK revealed that the British military has flown over 200 spy missions over Gaza since October 2023, providing intelligence to Israel. These flights are all operated from RAF Akrotiri, RAF base on Cyprus. They use advanced surveillance technology capable of capturing high-resolution footage of ground operations. RAF Akrotiri is also being used by the US Air Force to conduct surveillance flights too. A recent WikiLeaks report of a US cable between a UK military official and their US counterpart revealed details about the regular intelligence flights that the US is undertaking from RAF Akrotiri, that the UK officials said these American flights have become routine, that the US flew spy flights from there over Turkey and northern Iraq and Lebanon as well, and that the intelligence produced from these flights was intended to be passed to third-party governments, which really does seem pretty much likely to be Israel, doesn't it? Late last year, it was being reported that the UK can provide RAF-gathered evidence to the International Criminal Court, the ICC, for its investigation into Israeli war crimes, including those committed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the then Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, who subsequently became subject, of course, to ICC arrest warrants. Not that this footage ever ended up being handed over for that. Similarly, when it comes to these WCK killings, the Starmer government has also refused to release that footage, citing national security, which doesn't wash. It simply doesn't wash. Which nation? Whose security? It's not ours. This isn't happening in the UK, but it has affected UK citizens. So either Starmer is prioritising Israel over British people and justice for their deaths, or the national security excuse is about British complicity in war crimes, and that's really what's being covered up. Nothing else makes any sense to me here. Hamish Falconer, a Foreign Office minister, urged Israel to quickly conclude its investigation, which is simply the most creepingly inadequate and inept response when you are literally demanding the perpetrators of the killing of British civilians hurry up and mark their own homework over the matter. It isn't good enough. Why are you not investigating this yourself to the fullest extent? And if Israel are not going to permit you to do that, why are you not sanctioning them until they do? How can a state investigate its own war crimes credibly? The families of the British victims have called for an independent international investigation. It should be the very least they are given. Yet their pleas have been ignored. James Kirby's family expressed frustration at being left in the dark by the UK government, the request from them for the footage also going ignored, much as they themselves have been. On the anniversary of James Kirby's death, the family issued a scathing statement, reading, "Today, Tuesday, marks 1 year since the tragic death of my cousin James Kirby, who was killed by an Israeli drone strike. While the pain of losing him remains ever present, what has been equally devastating is the lack of justice and accountability. Despite repeated calls for answers, the family continues to be met with silence and no substantial action from the government. It is disheartening to note that after all of this time, we still have no concrete proof of accountability from any responsible party. The government's response has been nothing but empty apologies, which are, and will never be, sufficient. My family and I remain deeply concerned that breaches of policy or laws may have possibly occurred, which is possibly why the government has failed to engage meaningfully with us. The lack of communication and the continued absence of a thorough investigation could possibly suggest there are issues not highlighted to the families. Even more damning is Israel's refusal to apologise directly to the victims' families. Over a year later, there has been no contact from anyone in Israel, no accountability, no justice. The most plausible explanation, in my view, is that the UK fears its own complicity being exposed if they release the footage. If RAF footage shows the WCK convoy was clearly marked and the strike was deliberate, it would not only implicate Israel but also raise questions about Britain's role in facilitating such attacks. The UK spy flights are not passive observations. They actively assist Israel's targeting. If the RAF provided intelligence, even though they claim it is only ever in pursuit of locating the hostages, it could still be used in strikes that led to the killing of civilians. Goodness knows we know Israel care little for the people of Gaza, who for many are all Hamas anyway. British officials could be accessories to war crimes here, and Starmer's refusal to release the footage just makes them all look all the more guilty. The Starmer government's obstruction is a betrayal of the British victims and their families. By shielding Israel, it is endorsing impunity for war crimes and abandoning the principles of justice and accountability. Just like the families of those killed, we should all be demanding full disclosure of all RAF footage related to the WCK attack and all other surveillance flights the RAF is conducting. What are they doing on our behalf out there? There needs to be an independent investigation into these killings and into the RAF's actions, not one led by Israel or frankly by the British government. It has to be independent, KC-led. And there must be an end to UK spy flights over Gaza that are enabling Israel's military campaign. The deaths of James Kirby, John Chapman and James Henderson cannot be left in vain. If the UK truly stands for human rights, It must stop covering for Israel's crimes and confront its own role in Gaza's devastation, and if this government won't do that, we need shot of it for one who will. Meanwhile, Starmer's militant and authoritarian streak has been on display here too, raiding a Quaker meeting house in a bid to shut down the planning of a protest. Once again abusing our human rights, rights to assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and now even freedom to worship. A group of people eating hummus got arrested for the crime of putting issues like Gaza and the environment at the forefront of potential, peaceful disobedience, taken away in handcuffs before they could blink. But it's backfired royally on Starmer in the most hilarious, perfectly way it could. And you can find out all about that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe so you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as supporting the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.